We all set, Jack?
We're all set. Let's dive in, Lee.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Bird. I am the president of Btech and joined this morning by Jack Bailey with 1111 Systems. And we've got a really interesting topic for you today. This is one of those subjects that I think there's a lot of mystery around, and I know there's a lot of interest from the credit union community out there about cloud. And that word cloud, I don't know about that, but any case, excited to do this webinar with you today. So again, we're going to talk about cloud strategy, cloud journey, what this could look like for your credit union. So Jack, do you want to do a quick introduction, and then I'll introduce myself some more as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lee, I'm thrilled to be on the call with you today. My name's Jack Bailey, and at 1111, my role is helping our teams better understand the way that cloud solves for challenges with organizations and really how they can apply that technology to their best use. So I think we're going to have a great time today with Lee and I to talk about really solving challenges for your organization. But Lee, let's hear more about you and your phenomenal team you work with.
Yeah, thanks, Jack. So again, Lee Bird, president of Btech. We support over 130 credit unions across the country. We specialize in security and compliance for those credit unions. And sort of a quick backstory, we were originally introduced to 1111 about a year and a half ago through one of our credit union clients who had migrated to your platform. And through that journey, I got very interested. I was like, this is something that I know a lot of our credit union clients out there could really value from. And so we formed this partnership, and it's been great so far. So some quick housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded. So after today's call, we'll send the link out. Btech will also post it on our YouTube channel. We'll get this out to everyone. And Jack and I really want to make this valuable for you. And so rather than us just sitting here for an hour and going through all these slides, we are going to leave enough time at the end for a question and answer. So I know that questions always come up, especially with this topic. And so we're probably going to leave, I would guess, maybe 15, 20 minutes at the end. So if you have any questions, throw them into the questions area in the GoToWebinar, and we'll be sure to cover those at the end. We'll do our best. If it gets too technical, then we'll set up a technical call with you at another date. So I guess we're ready to get started. Does that work for you, Jack?
Absolutely, Lynn. Let's dive in. So,
all right.
Again, everyone on the call today, thank you so much for joining us. As Lee mentioned, our goal is to provide you with as much information as we can. So we really had the conversation today broken up into three key parts, where we're going to talk about upfront, really around cloud motivations and what we mean by cloud in the first place, right? We're then going to talk a little bit about the reality that credit unions such as yourself face when it comes to looking at the cloud around incomplete migrations, gaps, challenges, costs spiraling out of control. And then last but not least, we'll talk a little bit more about how 1111 and the Btech team help solve for some of those gaps at the end of it. But we really want to start up front today talking about motivations, right? Because we completely understand when it comes to moving a production environment, your mission critical data applications for your members and their success with your organization, very few people wake up in the morning and say, let's move our environment, right? There's some very compelling reasons as to why you might want to go about doing that. And we can start by really looking at this delivery gap, right? Organizations such as yourselves really have these challenges with the ability for the business expectations, member expectations on what your services can provide to them and what IT can deliver. And this is becoming more and more difficult, right? So we have this growing legacy IT administration, as many of your organizations have some mission critical components that are aging or dating, or maybe even having IT staff that knew how to best maximize them and manage them leaving. It's really hard to hire talent these days, right? And then IT is growing in complexity. The fact that you're on the call today about cloud technology means that you're either investigating it or you've invested some in cloud. And the second that you start having multiple environments, hybrid environments, consuming on-prem and in the cloud, it's far more complicated. And then unfortunately, as you all know, being on the call today as well, risk, especially for people in the financial space, is hugely high these days. There's a lot of security implications and challenges for organizations as well. And these are things that I hear day in, day out. But Lee, with the breadth of knowledge you have and your team working with as many credit unions as you do, what are you hearing on your side that you think would reflect the audience's challenges today?
You know, Jack, this slide, every time I look at it, I shake my head like this because honestly, this is my world. This is what credit unions are facing. And those four boxes or four titles at the bottom: legacy IT, scarcity of IT talent, IT complexity, and growing IT risk. So let me just share with you a quick story. Prior to the pandemic, our role with the credit union often was an examiner was in for an audit, there was a finding, the credit union would call us, we would help fix that finding. That was sort of what we saw prior to the pandemic. Post-pandemic, really the number one area for Btech and our business growth has been that scarcity of IT talent and the growing IT complexity. And I'll have a new call set up with a new credit union, and I always ask, you know, what is it that I can help you with? What do you want to get out of today's call? And it often goes something like, we used to have 9 people in IT, we have 4. We have a certain type of technology, and the engineer that was responsible for that is no longer with us. I mean, and then the third is, the board has told us we absolutely cannot have a ransomware attack, and we don't know how to secure our environment. So, I mean, this slide really hits on it. And I think a lot of people, when they think about cloud, they don't sort of associate some of these areas with cloud. They just think it's like another resource. And so hopefully in today's conversation, we're going to be able to sort of, you know, show by these motivations, how this could really help the credit union. So thanks, Jack.
Absolutely. No, thanks for that, Lee. It's great insight. And yeah, for the team on the call today, we're definitely going to start dispelling a little bit about what we mean by that cloud component and the value it is for your organization. So let's talk a little bit about how a lot of credit unions are looking to address these challenges, right? They may say, hey, when it comes to the ability to execute for my team and to meet members' expectations, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to leave some of these challenges related to performance or related to the ability to service customer or a member's needs by doing a hardware refresh and having additional components in my environment, right? Spend some of that money to make that happen. A lot of organizations will also say, hey, I hear about cloud as an approach to move to more of an operational expense model to maybe remove some of the infrastructure management, free up that team time. All things we'll talk about here in just a moment. But there's some challenges with this approach. And then as Lee and I are going to go into more detail on in a moment, there's an approach where you look at a cloud provider that has really tailored options to make a faster migration of your guests into our environment, more of an expert approach to it, and more of an end-to-end holistic way to solve challenges. What I'd like to do real quick, though, is start talking about some of those challenges that a lot of organizations on the credit union side are looking to address here. But before I do that, Lee, I guess this is one way I see the world, you know, of reinvesting on-prem, looking at things from just any cloud, or really focusing on a tailored approach there. What are your thoughts on what you see organizations doing on this regard?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, when we talk about cloud, something I personally do all the time is I ask, do you have a cloud strategy? And it's sort of a question that I learned, you know, probably 10, 15 years ago, and people, everybody's answer is different because I don't think people really understand. But you're right, and I would say on this slide, the area that people are that the credit unions we're working with, that we're seeing a lot of challenges with, fall into that hardware refresh category. I think credit unions are done with being in the 5-year life cycle credit union hardware business. Like it's ultimately the credit union is there to serve the members. They're not there to, you know, be an IT shop. I think the glamour of hardware, flashing lights in a data center, and all the nonsense that comes around that. I think again, through the pandemic, we learned with supply chain issues and everything else, even if you had the budget to do hardware refresh, do you have the talent to do it? Do you have the, you know, again, can you even get the equipment? And we're seeing, you know, in some cases, you know, simple controllers that are back ordered for 6 months, and you've got, you know, $100,000 in Dell or HP boxes sitting in a hallway waiting to get installed. I mean, these are real world scenarios that we see. So again, probably on this slide, for me at least, the one that I recognize often is that hardware refresh challenge. So
Yep, that makes perfect sense. So let's build on that real quick and let's talk a little bit more aspirationally, right? When organizations start thinking, okay, well, how would I solve challenges by leveraging the cloud, right? And again, we'll talk more about what we mean by that in a moment, but really some of the challenges that organizations in the financial and credit union space are thinking of is that exact point that you made a minute ago, Lee. Hey, I need to do potentially a hardware refresh, or I've got kits sitting on the floor of my environment, or the supply chain scenario that I'm dealing with as an organization means that my members' performance and the way my applications and data are served them is sluggish. It's missing the mark. Moving to the cloud will help me have increased performance, maybe on demand as well, right? Hey, I know that I'm in a sector or a vertical that's really targeted from a ransomware, malware, malicious user perspective. Moving to the cloud is going to help me from a security perspective, right? Hey, I have the goal of getting things done faster. And Lee, you just talked about this a moment ago. I want to be able to deliver my members value quicker. Maybe it's a new feature, a new application, a new component that I want to launch for my members to be able to consume. And I want to be able to have that capability. Maybe it's an organization like one of you on the call today that maybe had more of a regional reach, and you're looking to grow that a little bit more broadly within your members and gain additional members by branching out there. So geographic reach as well, right? Everyone in the financial space is looking to eliminate downtime, right? And make sure that whether it's deposits, banking system components, or whatever the case may be, is always available for your members to be able to access. And then, of course, just what that experience looks like, right? Getting the right level of support, the right level of uptime. And then last but not least, making sure that your budgets that you set aside for IT are maximized and optimized where you're not having to go back to the well and you can really deliver on this promise for your members at the end of the day. So Lee, you and I have talked about this a bit. There's hundreds of reasons why people might look at the cloud and say, that's the right next step. And with all the organizations you deal with, I'd love to get some of your perspective on this because we're generalizing some, we're bringing down these 8, but I'd love to see what you see the most of here and what challenges you see a lot of your credit union organizations pointing out and saying, that's what I'm really trying to achieve.
It boils down to the cost, and ultimately, Jack, I think credit unions, they run very lean. That's part of the nature of a credit union, is taking in those deposits and getting them back out to the members as loans, and we understand that. I think one of the challenges for a lot of credit unions when they talk about cloud and understand cloud is that they often are faced with sort of daunting or not very consistent costs associated with it. And so they want to see the value of cloud, but there really is not a number. At least if they go buy that hardware, it's a fixed cost. They can depreciate it over 5 years, whatever it may be. I know it's something that we're going to cover a little bit later in what 1111, how 1111 addresses that concern. But you know, the other one is that business agility. Right now, credit unions are implementing so much new technology, especially member-facing technology. You need to, regardless of size of your credit union, the members just expect more technology. It's, you know, I know I love going into the new credit union branches where, you know, they still have teller lines and all that, but honestly, it's all about that experience for the member. And I know a lot of credit unions, a lot of our clients are also trying to grow a younger membership of the credit union, and that's all related to technology. So again, how you have an IT department, you've got those data centers, you've got those racks with all those servers, but can you implement new technology in the credit union? And often that becomes the challenge. So this is a great slide, Jack. This one, I think, touches all those key areas.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit, Lee. You thought it'd be valuable to spend a little time today really just demystifying what do we mean by the cloud in the first place, though. And from our perspective coming in this conversation, we're talking about where you're focusing your team's time when it comes to delivering that value for your members, right? And when we talk about the cloud, what we're really talking about is eliminating the infrastructure management layers and components within your local environment and effectively shifting that, in this case, to an 1111 systems environment where we're ultimately providing the underlying layers, the storage, the compute, the virtualization, the interconnectivity, and all those components that are absolutely critical to making things function within an environment, but don't necessarily deliver value for you and your members at the end of the day, and really try to allow you to focus more on your member experience through the quality of the data, the applications, and the IP that you bring to your members at the end of the day. To Lee's point, perhaps either modernizing or focusing on broadening your audience or whatever the case may be. So that's really what we're talking about by this cloud experience, is effectively removing that infrastructure component within your environment, consuming it more as a service or an IaaS type model, and focusing more within your environment on that member experience. Lee, what else would you like to add to this slide?
Jack, I love your slides. Again, that infrastructure layer down at the bottom, that is 1111 systems, right? That's what you are doing. That's what you're bringing to the table. And I think ultimately that's the piece for most management and credit unions that scares them the most. It has the highest expense. They don't know what it does. They don't know what the pieces and parts are about. Ultimately, they just want those top three items. They, the CEO, chief marketing officer, the CFO, whatever, they want to improve that member experience. And every time that they turn and talk to IT starts getting into all these whiz-bang stuff at the bottom, which is that infrastructure. And again, 1111 provides that. So it's basically, you still, again, as the credit union, you still have your virtual servers, but you don't have to keep investing in all that infrastructure, that hardware. You can focus on ultimately what you want, which is that outcome, which is that member experience. And this slide, it's like, well, there's another one coming up. Again, I keep saying that because we've got some good ones here, but it really does tell the story. I mean, this is it. This is pretty easy stuff. So again, I appreciate this, Jack. This I know is so valuable for the credit unions on today's call. So.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Lee. So, team, we mentioned that we're going to do this in 3 parts. So we were talking about the aspirations of the cloud, right? Ultimately, allowing for your organizations to focus on your member experience and all the components we talked about a moment ago. But let's talk about the reality of some of those approaches. If we rewind back in time just a moment, we think about some of the 3 outcomes that oftentimes organizations look at the path for solving their IT delivery gap. Is that hardware refresh? Hey, just any cloud will do, or really focusing on someone who's tailored their cloud experience to the credit union space here. And let's talk about the reality of what occurs here. So many of you already know this, or your team members that you chat with, to Lee's point, on the technology side know this, that a hardware refresh at the end of the day doesn't solve much. Because effectively what we're doing here is we're still requiring for your team members on that IT staff that are still short on staffing, on expertise, may have members of the team that they're very experienced leaving here. They have a lot on their plates when it comes to providing that member experience and innovation that they have to provide here. And so one of the reasons that organizations like mine at 1111 are such big advocates of looking at the cloud experience here is that we can really look at, hey, let's right-size the environment so that we can maximize your budgets. We'll talk more about this in a moment, but make sure that we're not having the fluctuation and that we can have more of a flat line experience for you and maximizing those budgets, but deliver on that member experience and innovation that you can provide on top of that at the end of the day here without all those hoops to jump through. So this is one reason why when I look at the hardware refresh angle, I think that it sort of kicks the can down the street a little bit and it doesn't address some of the real challenges that we talked about earlier of some of the risk components of it, the staffing components of it. All this really addresses the hardware piece. And for many organizations like yourself, that's one of the things that you want to eliminate very heavily as part of that environment. Lee, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that shifting and elimination here in a moment, but anything you'd like to add from a hardware refresh experience? Because you mentioned many of your customers have looked at this approach. There still are some challenges here. Do you have any stories or angles you'd like to share on that?
Yeah, there's always a bump in the road, right? And the one on this slide that comes up a lot now we're seeing is the software licensing and the complexity of it. And we have credit union clients that are being faced with true up audits. These are non-budgeted. These are all of a sudden because the vendor changed their licensing from sort of a perpetual license to maybe a subscription model. This is what all these vendors are doing, and just even understanding what that software licensing looks like is such a challenge for a credit union. And so obviously getting rid of those items on that left-hand side, that DIY experience, all those areas now being covered by 1111, and ultimately, again, getting you what you want, which is that member experience. That's so valuable. But the software licensing, we're working with 2 credit unions right now that are faced with this, and it's just an absolute challenge. And they've come to us and said, how can we help? And we've introduced them to 1111 in both cases, because that was the problem, not necessarily the hardware refresh, but just getting the licensing fixed.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, and that's so critical to know, Lisa, thanks for sharing your story on that. The elimination of the stack is a really critical component of looking at moving to the cloud. Again, we talked about motivations a moment ago, but let's continue with that reality. So the other reality here is, will just any cloud do, right? Can't I get infrastructure as service anywhere? And the reality is there's many people in the space. There's AWS, there's Azure, there's Google Cloud, there's others that spend a lot of marketing money and have some truly great offerings out there. But these cloud experiences, especially for credit union organizations, may fall a little short when it comes to the migration approach. So let's take a look at that in action. As many on the call know today, there are many components of your infrastructure that are absolutely mission critical to your ability to have success with your members, to maybe meet compliance, to deliver on that experience though. And when it comes to a migration to just any cloud out there, oftentimes what we see is, unfortunately, components may be left behind. This might be a Fedline or Fiserv router, and maybe a non-virtualized component of infrastructure that's critical to your business for your members' purposes. But at the end of the day, this leads to really an incomplete migration. And unfortunately, there's some challenges that are even further compounded at the end of the day, right? So when your environment, when your organization chooses to move to a cloud provider like an AWS or Azure, it's like the equivalent of moving from an iPhone to an Android or Windows phone. There's conversion of guests required. Things don't work right away. There's a gap in expertise. The staff that you have, as limited as they are typically specialized and focused on VMware-based technology for decades or decade plus now, and they have to learn a completely new experience there, which can lead to a lot of gaps in delivery and slower time to market. And then unfortunately, you have this ongoing dual site experience of still having to have a server room and hardware and physical components on-prem that you haven't yet eliminated. And Lee, I know you've mentioned that this is something you've experienced with your clients many times. Do you want to speak on some stories here?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the best thing that ever happened to the word cloud were vendors like AWS and Azure. And we saw, 6, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, a lot of credit unions started using Azure, and it was great because they could very quickly bring up new systems. And I think, unfortunately, where we have kind of gotten to in 2023 is a lot of credit unions, again, regardless of size, see the value of cloud because they have had successful public deployments, vendors like Azure. And when the CFO says, hey, since these 2 servers are working great in Azure, what do we have to do to get that data center moved to Azure? And that's where we run into the challenge with this slide. If it's just isolated stand-up systems, again, you can do it quickly, but ultimately you end up now with 2 data centers. You've got some systems in the cloud, some on the production site. I think ultimately a lot of credit unions are really starting to see the value of essentially getting their data center, getting all that hardware, getting the complete kit and caboodle out of there. And again, we're kind of jumping ahead here, but we're going to show you the value of an 1111 migration and how we can do that so that you aren't kind of leaving stuff behind. The next piece I'll mention to it is we talked earlier about credit unions particularly having a hard time with IT staffing, and you sort of touched on it there. An 1111 migration is still using platforms that everybody is really sort of familiar with. So primarily VMware, still running your Windows servers, all of that. Azure and AWS are phenomenal, they're great, but if you've sort of leveraged Azure, and that's the direction you want to go, it's a whole nother talent skill set. So now you're interviewing really specialized engineers, and again, that's hard. Even if you had the unlimited budget, you can't find those people. I mean, it's the talent right now is super difficult to hire people in IT. It's very, very tough. So again, that's a big issue.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge. I look at statistics quite often with what I do, and right now on the security side and the cloud side, there are almost as many open roles as there are people that are qualified for those roles in the entire market. So it's very, very hard to find good help on that right now. There's another gap that we need to talk about here, though, which if we think back to some of the motivations from before, right? Lee, you mentioned that there's some really big ones here, like faster time to market, being able to innovate and being able to deliver members with a real quality experience. But you also mentioned that a big emphasis is really just making sure that the budget can be adhered to and that costs are optimized and are able to really be met at the end of the day. So what I wanted to focus on real quick in this slide, and this is not to pick on AWS or Azure, they're phenomenal offerings, but depending on your goals as an organization, that's why we always start with motivations and the expectations of the cloud. If your thoughts are that moving to the cloud is going to automatically give you better security or faster time to market or optimize your costs, there's many in the space that run into a lot of challenges with this. And some of those challenges are how often things are sold and managed separately from a cloud environment perspective. So elements like security, for example, that security management would fall right back on your team that's so short-staffed to begin with. When it comes to time to market, Lee, you were just talking about it, there's team training, there's conversion, and there's the inability in many cases just to find people that can help with that conversion and cut over in the first place. So it actually leads to a slower time to market from an initial migration and then ongoing development cycle as well, which can be hugely challenging. With so many in the credit union and financial space being targeted specifically for ransomware, malware, and insider threats, availability and recovery is very critical. But unfortunately, if you go to just any cloud provider, like a public cloud provider, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or others, the tools and technology are sold and managed separately, and ultimately that responsibility falls right back on your team's laps again. And then when it comes to optimizing costs, these aren't my numbers. These are numbers from surveys of thousands of different IT professionals and also analysts and Gartner numbers to say that 80% of organizations that move to an AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, or other public cloud provider are spending up to 50% more than what they expected to because of how often things are sold and managed separately, or how often they're having to go back to the well to get their team additional training or additional staffing to make those environments work. So again, this is not to pick on any of these providers at all, but really just to talk about meeting the expectations that you all have as a credit union on what the cloud should deliver with you, and some of the many challenges that we see organizations face when they ultimately make that cutover. But again, Lee, you live this day in and day out. I'd love to get your perspective on this.
Yeah, the cost is that's a big challenge. Credit unions, again, their budgets in general are approved by the board of directors. It's annual budgets, and there is not a lot of room for monkey business. And when they are expecting a budget of X, and all of a sudden it's X times 1.5 or whatever, that doesn't always work. That's very, very difficult for credit unions. And again, we see inconsistencies in billing because a lot of the public cloud vendors, it's based on usage. And so you could have a platform, a database perhaps, that 1 month is at a certain usage level, and then maybe the next month, let's say it's a database and you're running a certain number of more reports or whatever it might be, and all of a sudden your usage costs go up. And again, it's I think credit unions really like fixed cost. They like to know that every month this is what we're going to be paying for this solution. It's budgeted, the board's approved it. We don't have to go back and explain why our budget's gone over. And then again, also that availability and recovery. We're seeing more of an emphasis on disaster recovery. The NCUA came out with a whole new list of credit union IT security rules back February 1st called the ISE, Information Security Exam. And the Core Plus controls, which are the optional controls, about half of them are related to disaster recovery and basically uptime. It's not even, the old DR was, okay, well, we've got a recovery time objective, an RTO of 8 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours. That's not good enough anymore. I mean, basically, it's all now about being up and just maintaining your operational uptime. It has to be 99.999%. I mean, that's just the way it is now, especially as we talked earlier, especially as you develop more applications and you're putting more things into IT for those members and that member experience. If a member is expecting to be able to get on to the home banking platform at 2 in the morning because that's when they can do it and it's not working, that's not good enough. So again, these are great challenges, Jack. We see this in all these deployments.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lee, for your expertise there. So let's spend just a few moments talking a little bit about what this looks like from an 1111 perspective. And I'd like to use the term the more complete cloud here, because when your organization moves all these mission critical applications that ultimately lead to that member experience to the cloud, there are some must-haves to make you all successful as an organization. And so Lee just touched on a lot of these. And again, I'll go through this briefly, is because Lee's team and partnering with Btech on all these conversations is such a critical link for anyone on the call to do. But what we ultimately provide from an 1111 perspective is a focus on integration of protection and recovery. It's not an afterthought. It's not sold separately. It's built into the platform to make sure that you always have the number of copies of data you need, the recoverability, the data sovereignty of having multiple copies of the data as needed, but all within the geographic region that you need to maintain compliance or meet framework attestations at the end of the day, which is critical, right? We want to make sure that you have visibility to all the costs within your environment, that all the predictability is there, and there's a tool we'll talk about in a moment that we use to right size and validate this going into it. We want to make sure that whether it's the Fiserv or Fedline router components, or just having a network infrastructure in place that meets your team's needs and your members' requirements as well, that you have that. When it comes to security and compliance, there are a few cloud providers that have more frameworks and attestations than 1111. And a lot of the security tools around vulnerability scanning, malware, antivirus, reputation components that are critical to credit unions to have in place are built into the platform, as well as managed security services that we can add on top with our expertise as well. And then last but not least, when we talk about faster time to value, right? This is built on the same platform and technology staff that your IT members today understand and leverage day in and day out. So it almost serves as an extension of their expertise in their environment, allowing for much faster migration. And then the day two experience for your team is much, much more streamlined for them to be able to begin developing that intellectual property and managing applications and data in a positive way for that member experience as well. So again, Lee, I'd love to hear your perspective, because you've talked and worked with a lot of organizations to look at 1111 system as part of this cloud platform. What stands out to you? What would you emphasize here?
Yeah, I mean, it's the visibility into the environment. I mean, I like this slide because these are all real screenshots of the resources and tools that come with the 1111 relationship. So we aren't having to retrain teams on, different types of systems and how you understand or visibility into the environment. Honestly, you just used a comment day two. It really is, the migrations are so seamless, so easy to do, that I think what we hear from a lot of our clients that have migrated their environment to 1111 is that one of the things they appreciate and that they like more is the ease of visibility into their systems. And that is baked into what 1111 does. And that's a big part of it. It's not, again, it's the VMs, the virtual environments that the engineers are familiar with. Going back to that original slide, taking away all of that very complex infrastructure layer and not having to worry about that. It's an 1111 managed environment, and then the visibility through the consoles and the ability to manage your own environment is wonderful. So, and I just sort of a side plug, because I don't know if we have a slide for it. We have had to leverage 1111's technical resources for a couple of clients, and it's unbelievable, you know, that this is a US based company, incredible 24/7 support, you know, and they went beyond their perimeter to assist our client in one case. And you know, again, it's a great organization. So I know I'm kind of jumping around, Jack, but I I get excited
No.
about this because I love it when I see technology that makes everybody's life a little easier. So
No, I love hearing the stories, Lee, because I could talk all day long about how we have actual numbers from members and organizations that we work with, right, that have a 98% support and onboarding satisfaction rating. But hearing it from you makes such a big difference on that. But let's talk about that real quick, because while I'm showing the 1111 Cloud Console and the visibility and power that your teams have access to, they really, again, provide a faster time to value, cut costs on training, ramp up and cut over, and ultimately include most of all the components that are necessary for your organization to have success from a security and networking and all those perspectives. But let's talk about the migration process as well. Unfortunately, when organizations looking at moving to the cloud, when they move to a new platform like an AWS or Azure, oftentimes that comes with the 5, 6, 7-figure cost of migration. And from an 1111 perspective, we actually have an end-to-end migration process, beginning with you working with the Btech team to do an infrastructure assessment. We'll talk about this in just a moment with the tool that we have in sight that does costing analysis, compatibility, and connectivity analysis of your environment to make sure it's going to work before you try to cut over, the right time to do it. We have staff members in our environment that ultimately do thousands of cutovers a year. We as an organization are the largest in terms of many vendors related to data migration and platform management. And so we have a ton of expertise on that side. We actually do the implementation of the migration technology. We do a practice run where we validate the migration plan before we cut you over into our environment. We do cutover. As Lee mentioned, you get to work with a phenomenal support team during migration and afterwards. And then afterwards, you're given the keys to this cloud console that empowers your team to have the same visibility and controls before, but with the elimination of everything in that stack we talked about related to the data center, the storage, the compute, the networking that aren't providing value for you as an organization, but are critical to be up there and running at the end of the day. So what this leads from a day one and day two experience, right, overall, is we're helping reduce a lot of that risk that we talked about. Because when we talk about the member expectations and IT delivery, we said that risk is something that's huge for the financial vertical, right? So we build in and integrate replication between our sites within the US from a data sovereignty and geographic perspective. We integrate in backups, we integrate in security suite. And again, there's few cloud providers out there that can match the compliance levels we do to make sure that whether it's auditing requirements or anything of that nature, we help you meet those needs. We've talked about it a lot today, but from a predictable cost perspective, we start with a custom built tool in-house here that Lee's going to speak to here in just a few moments to help right-size the environment and validate many times that you can actually reduce costs and more efficiently move things into our environment to make it more cost effective and stretch your budget that much further. And we include the components that are needed to power the environment so that we remove that challenge of the 20 to 50% overspend that a lot of organizations get when they move to a hyperscaler in the first place. And last but not least, right, we're in the business at 1111 of managing the infrastructure, making for successful and secure cloud outcomes, but we allow you as a credit union organization to really focus on that speed to market, innovating and helping meet those members' expectations at the end of the day. So Leah, again, I'd love to come to you before we talk about what next steps look like, how engagement with your incredible team would look like for those on the call today. Any final thoughts on the outcomes that we just talked to from a migration or a day two experience there?
Yeah, no, in fact, I've got a question over here that popped up that I think is a good one here to cover as we get close to the end. So somebody was asking about compliance because that obviously for a credit union, there are wonderful IT technologies, but a lot of times credit unions or financial institutions are constrained and can't do them. So one of the questions came up is the system US based? It is. So the data centers are all here in the United States. And Jack, there's 3 data centers in the US, correct? Geographically, is that right? Or
Yeah, 3 different regions that we service, all the cloud components that we mentioned today. That's absolutely right, Lee.
Yep. And then something else that I know with the vetting of 1111 that our clients have done is the vendor due diligence piece. So there are the SOC 2 reports, there's all the financials, all of that. So that usually is one of the challenges for credit unions is they have some great ideas and they want to implement new technology, but they know ultimately there's going to be an audit. The examiner is going to be asking who is 1111 and why are your systems there? But yes, they are all, we've got all the vendor due diligence. It is US based. So the member information is not going out of the country. We've got it all right here in the US. So, and then the other question had to do with what does the migration look like? And that gets back to that assessment piece that you spoke about just a minute ago. And so Jack, can we tell them a little bit about this Catalyst tool? Yeah, there you go. Perfect. Great timing.
Yeah, absolutely. Lee, so I'd love for you to walk through, but team, I just wanted to mention for all those on the call today, the fact, Lee, that you proactively know all the components around due diligence and all that, it just, again, it makes it so valuable to work with the Btech team. So love having all your expertise on the call. How have you used this tool, though, to help customers look at that migration process?
Yeah, so this is it. So it all starts with that assessment. So honestly, after today's call, the easiest way to understand what this would look like for you is 1111 has done all the heavy lifting and provides, there's no cost for this, a tool called the Catalyst tool. And Btech engineers will work with you to put this into your environment. And sort of the piece to this is we just need to know what size environment you're going to need, how much storage, how much RAM, how much CPU or processor. The Catalyst tool analyzes your existing environment, which is very important. So we run it over the course of a few days. We get a really good understanding of what your environment looks like. We add some buffer space to it so that we're sure that when we give you a number, that's what you're going to be billed every month. And then that document gets sent to the team that I work with at 1111 for the pricing and the proposals. And then once we do that, then we go through some really good design work. But ultimately, it's kind of like showing an architect your lot. Like here, this is what I have, and this is where I want to go to. So that's what the Catalyst tool does. So again, that's not a heavy lift. That's an easy process. We don't have to ship servers to you. We don't have to have anybody come on site. I don't want to, oversimplify this, but it really is maybe a 20 or 30-minute webinar or Zoom call, Teams call, and the Btech engineers would help you out with this. And then the other piece to it is getting back to that question about the migration. I don't want to say there's no downtime because there is a cutover, but the migration piece is not to get too technical, but 1111 uses a software product called Zerto, Z-E-R-T-O. You can Google it. It's an industry standard. It's not like some special tool that 1111 has. But what we do is while you are on your existing on-prem solution, your data is being securely replicated to 1111's environment. So there is, at some point, there's whatever that delta difference is during that cutover, but it's maybe a couple of minutes. I mean, it's not like you're going to be down on Friday and come back on Monday morning. I mean, we really have everything kind of running in the cloud prior to this cutover. The cutover are networking changes, changing the IP addresses and some of that, but that's what it looks like. And I think a lot of people are pretty astonished that it's not this, gosh, this is going to be, a project. It's going to take us, months and months and months to do. It's not super complex.
Yeah, and just to add just a tiny bit to that story, Lee, you mentioned the Zerto technology. We're the largest provider in the world for that technology. Again, thousands of at-bats of moving organizations to the cloud. And to your point, Lee, we actually will do a test migration and validate that it works before confirming cutover. So it truly minimizes any downtime as part of the approach. And the other really great thing about working with the Btech organization running Catalyst is this tool not only will find the cost components and where, again, you can maximize your budget as an organization, but it also does pre-flight checks to make sure that the compatibility will work when you cut over into our environment, thus again, improving time to market overall there. So it's a great tool, and it's a great organization to work with yours, Lee, to run it and really look at the outcomes there at the end of the day. Lee, were there any other questions that you saw come in that you wanted us to address as we begin wrapping up here?
I don't have any other questions on my side. Any other questions come up?
No, sir. I think you addressed them, but obviously, I hope everyone on the call knows that your team is the right ones to work with when it comes to addressing additional ones that didn't come to mind today. And man, it was awesome presenting with you and taking advantage of your expertise on the call today. So thank you so much for hopping on.
Thank you so much, Jack. This was a lot of fun. And again, this is recorded. We'll get this out to people. And, you know, I think for credit unions out there, if you are looking, we're going to start getting pretty close to budget season here. And if you are looking at replacing hardware, or maybe disaster recovery is important for you, or you're challenged by not having enough IT staff, let's have a conversation, because again, I think we can kind of show the true value and ultimately get you out of the IT hardware business and get you more into that member experience business. So thanks, Jack. I really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thanks all. Talk to you soon. Take care.
All right. See you. Bye.